The Earth is considered the only planet in the universe that supports life. The environment gives us countless benefits that we cannot repay our entire life. Yet, how do we treat it? We cut down trees and clear the forests. We take up so much space for our homes, cities, malls, and amusement parks. We pollute the land, water, and air. We bring invasive species into habitats. We humans alter the environment to meet the needs of our society, and this has serious consequences. In view of this, we ask ourselves, are we invasive? Are humans invasive? Can we consider ourselves an invasive species and a trespasser of the flora? This info video will go beyond the surface to explore this.
Before we dive into that question, let's understand first what flora is, the nitrogen cycle, and how they are married to each other. Flora is a collective term for all plant life in a particular region or time. This name represents the entire plant kingdom. Flora is classified and differentiated based on many factors. One classification is the area in which they are grown or are found. Some plants grow in desert regions or in water. Some are found in hilly areas, while others are endemic to specific geographic locations. On the other hand, flora relates to nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen cycle is an important part of the ecosystem. It is a biogeochemical process through which the nitrogen is converted into many forms, consecutively passing from the atmosphere to the soil to organisms and back to the atmosphere. Nitrogen cycle involves such processes such as nitrogen fixation, nitrification, denitrification, decay, and putrefaction. So, how is nitrogen cycle married to flora? Well, nitrogen is a key nutrient element for plants. It is important for plant growth. The plants absorb the usable nitrogen compounds from the soil through their roots. The fixed nitrogen is then carried to other parts of the plants, which is used to form plant tissues so that the plant can grow. Additionally, these nitrogen compounds are used to produce proteins and other compounds in the plant cell. In other words, plants also depend on the nitrogen cycle, and they are part of the nitrogen cycle itself.
Plant, insect, fish, fungus, bacteria, or even an organism's seeds or eggs that are not native to an ecosystem and causes harm are called invasive species. Invasive species have the potential to extirpate native plants and animals, reduce biodiversity, compete for limited resources with native creatures, and modify environments in which it colonizes or grows. This could have massive economic consequences as well as basic ecosystem changes. An invasive plant species is the Opuntia cactus, also known as the prickly pear cactus. It is depleting soil and water resources and reducing grazing areas in Kenya. It is ruining the livelihood in Kenya's rural communities. The cactus needle-like spine injures livestock and scratches cars as it spreads. Other notable examples of invasive plant species are kudzu vine, English ivy, yellow star thistle, and water hyacinth. Indeed, humans also meet this aspect of invasiveness. Many human activities can impact the flora and nitrogen cycle, which we'll talk about in the anthropogenic effect in flora and nitrogen cycle.
The term anthropogenic means an effect resulting from human activity. So the anthropogenic effect means the human impact on the environment that includes changes to the ecosystem, biodiversity, and natural resources caused directly or indirectly by humans. Some of the issues such as global warming and the loss of biodiversity have been described as posing serious threat to humanity's survival. So what is the anthropogenic effect in the nitrogen cycle? To begin with, many human activities have a large impact on the nitrogen cycle. The burning of fossil fuels, the use of nitrogen-based fertilizers, and other activities can significantly increase the amount of biologically available nitrogen in an ecosystem. In many ecosystems, the nitrogen supply is a key factor in controlling the nature and diversity of plant life, the population dynamic of both grazing animals and their predators, and vital ecological processes such as plant productivity and cycling of carbon and soil minerals. So, the addition of nitrogen in a terrestrial ecosystem, for example, can lead to nutrient imbalance in trees, changes in forest health, and declines in plant biodiversity. These scenarios lead to Le Chatelier's principle, wherein these activities that disturb the equilibrium or the balance in a system can lead to adaptation with respect to the change to re-establish a new state of equilibrium. How about the anthropogenic effects in flora? Plant biodiversity is one of the anthropogenic effects on flora. You see, ecosystems are fragile. If an ecosystem is disrupted by altering an environmental constraint due to human activities, those plant species that thrive in that environment will no longer be adapted for life there. This can drastically change the ecosystem and biodiversity and end in the extinction of some plant species. Another is the increase in the emission of nitric oxide and ammonia. These nitrogen gases contribute to enhancing the greenhouse effect that warms the earth. Also, nitric oxide is one of the main precursors of acid rain, and as we know, acid rain can not only destroy infrastructures like buildings, but also destroy the soil nutrients and lead plants to die.
Epigenetics is the study of heritable changes in gene expression without the change in DNA sequence. In other words, it is the study of how our behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way our genes work. So how do plants relate to epigenetics? Plants rely on epigenetic mechanisms to function properly. Macroscopic observations of plants in the past led to basic understandings of how plants respond to their environments and growth. Plants are continuously exposed to environmental stresses and changes. Plants' growth and development are affected by these abiotic stresses. To cope with climate change and increasing occurrences of unpredictable environmental circumstances, plants have developed genetic and epigenetic mechanisms that enable them to withstand single or combined stresses in their interactions. Developing climate-smart crops also requires understanding how epigenetic changes are transmitted across generations. Recent research has focused on epigenetic mechanisms, particularly those involved in agricultural response to environmental changes, which could be useful for crop improvement and development of climate-smart crops.
So now that we've covered the flora and the nitrogen cycle, invasive species, anthropogenic effects, and epigenetics, we're left with one question. Can humans be classified as invasive species or trespassers of the flora and the nitrogen cycle? The answer is no. Despite the activities that harm the environment and disrupt the ecosystem, we're not considered invasive species. First, invasive species must be non-native, and since humans have inhabited practically every continent, we are native species in some sense. Second, we were not brought to any ecosystem or environment. Rather, we belong to it. Lastly, invasive species are introduced to a new habitat by someone or something while humans move themselves and there is no outside force aiding their spread. However, we cannot deny that we have wreaked havoc on the environment, particularly the flora. Just because we're not on the list of invasive species does not mean that we're not causing harm to the plants and, in general, our environment. We humans can either be problem solvers or problem makers. We should stop disrupting the ecosystem, endangering the flora, and harming our environment. Let us not sit around waiting to be dubbed the ultimate invaders.